If it is nighttime, do not watch this video, especially if you live in Houston, Texas. This story was told to me by a nurse colleague named Nicole. Nicole used to work as a transition nurse in this hospital off of 1960. Now this hospital is scheduled for demolition and I don't know if it still exists to this day. So on Nicole's unit, there was 2 OR rooms, OR number 1 and OR number 2. And in those OR rooms, they typically would do C-sections. And in between the 2 OR rooms was the scrub station where, the doctors and nurses would scrub in and out. So one day during one of these C-sections, a nurse has a heart attack and collapses. This nurse collapses and they're calling in extra people to come help her and to help with the surgery. And, they're trying to manage this emergency situation. They don't know exactly what's going on, but they do their ABCs. They're like, okay, we're starting compressions. This nurse is, dying. They quickly finish the C-section and, they get the baby out and they move the mother and the baby over into OR number 1. The anesthesiologist kind of moves to work on the nurse and, they're doing compressions and they do compressions for about 45 minutes and eventually they do have to call it. Now, this was extremely devastating. Not only did this nurse have a heart attack and pass away, but this nurse was actually there when they were laying the bricks for this hospital. So this was an original nurse. This was not oh, I was hired on and I'm new to the team. No, this was an OG nurse. So years after this nurse passes away, the staff start to notice weird things happening on the unit. Things would get misplaced, things would get knocked over, and even more spooky is that a lot of staff members actually would see the nurse in OR2. The area was actually so notorious for paranormal activity that the staff actually refused to go there by themselves a lot of the times. A lot of times they were like, nope, I'm taking you with me. I don't want to go there by myself. It's creepy. And when my friend Nicole got hired on to be a nurse on that unit, and she heard of all these spooky stories and things getting misplaced and thrown around, she didn't really believe it. So there's an incoming C-section. OR number 2 is prepped, and mind you, this is the OR that she died in. So as this doctor is in between these 2 OR rooms, he's scrubbing in, he looks up into OR number 2. Mind you, no one is supposed to be in that OR room at the moment because all the staff is literally with the patient about to roll them down the hall. So no one should be in OR number 2, but he looks up, he looks into OR number 2 through the window on the door, and he sees his dead colleague walk by the window. And when I say dead colleague, I mean he knew the nurse that died. He was also there when they started this hospital, when they first opened the doors, he knew her. So he immediately recognized who that nurse was, and as he's finishing up scrubbing in, the other nurses are coming down with the patient, and he's like, whoa, stop, hold on, I need you to prep OR number 1. And the nurses are kind of looking at each other like, okay, but we just prepped OR number 2. Everything is ready in OR number 2. Why do you want to move it to OR number 1? And the doctor is like, no. We cannot go in OR number 2 because she is in there. And all of the staff members knew exactly who he was talking about. So they went and prepped OR number 1. And so they would do the surgery in OR number 1. Now, this particular nurse was a really good nurse and she protected her patients even after death. So when this nurse was alive, she notoriously did not like a particular doctor. And it would actually turn out that this particular doctor would end up getting sued for malpractice because she was doing shady things. And when I say shady, I mean this doctor was doing C-sections and mommy makeovers at the same time. But none of this came out until after the nurse passed away. And what's interesting is that when the nurses and the staff would go and prep the OR and get all the doctor's things in order, that particular doctor would always have their stuff knocked over. So much to the point where they would actually have to tell the doctor, hey, look, she don't want you in there. And the doctor would be understanding about it and be like, oh, well, okay, we'll just go in the other room then. So obviously, as my friend Nicole is telling me all this, I'm like, okay, well, I have to ask, did you ever see her? And Nicole would even say well, yeah, I've seen her. And I'm like, obviously curious, well, what did she look like? And she's like, well, she looked like a staff member. She had the green scrubs, her little scrub cap, and most of the time you'd see her walking by the window, and then a few minutes later she just kind of walked by again, and then a few minutes later she'd do it again. And that is all I have for the story. If you like spooky content like this, you can follow me if you want. If not, then stay safe.
If you have a toddler, do not listen to the story alone. This is probably the creepiest Llorona story time that I have ever heard. The person who submitted this does not want anyone knowing that this happened to their family, so let's call them Elena and Luis. Elena and Luis had just bought their first home located in Española, New Mexico. It was like a 1950s style of a home with like old wooden floors, a huge wraparound porch, and a ginormous yard overlooking a river. When they first got there, they were super excited, unpacking all of their boxes and setting up their 3-year-old daughter's bedroom, who we're gonna call Lucy. Everything was perfectly fine the first couple nights until about the third night. Elena and Luis happened to wake up at exactly 2 a.m. for absolutely no reason. They just like get up and they have like this dreadful, awful feeling. Then out of nowhere, they start to hear what sounds like the cries of a woman coming from like a distance. At first, they're trying to tell themselves that maybe it's just some sort of animal that's crying, making the noise, until they both clearly hear the words, "Ay, mis hijos." They're completely paralyzed. They know all about La Llorona, and the first thought in their head is that they need to go get their daughter. So they run into their daughter's room, get her in bed with them, and they start to pray. They continue to pray until finally the cries of this woman goes away. The next morning, they try to convince themselves that maybe they just imagined the whole thing. They're just like so exhausted because they've been unpacking and they've been doing so much, and they try to kind of just shrug it off. The next couple nights, nothing happens, which really confirms the fact that they must have just imagined the whole thing, until about a week later, Elena and Luis happen to wake up once again with the same dreadful feeling, and then they start to hear the words, "Ay, mis hijos," but the only difference is that this time it sounds like it's coming literally from right outside their back door. Terrified, they try to get up to go grab their daughter, but neither Elena or Luis can move. Like, they're both completely paralyzed. They're fully aware of what's going on, but they can't react. Thankfully, Elena's grandmother had spent the night that night. She was helping them with the last couple things of them like decorating and getting the house together. She had fallen asleep on the couch. She also heard La Llorona. Before she even has a chance to like react, she hears footsteps coming from the hallway, and she hears the back door open. She quickly jumps up and runs towards the back door and sees little Lucy, little 3-year-old Lucy, headed outside towards where La Llorona was screaming. Grandma runs out there, grabs Lucy, but not before looking over, and literally she got a really good look at La Llorona. This is kind of like how she kind of described what she looked like. La Llorona's just standing there. She grabs the little girl and runs inside and slams the door. The minute she runs inside and slams the door, Elena and Luis are snapped out of being paralyzed. It's almost like whatever was keeping them paralyzed like breaks. They all kind of gather together and start to pray, and eventually La Llorona does kind of move on. But this was like way too much for them. Not long after, they decided to put the house up for sale again and move, which was a huge loss for them. So have you ever encountered La Llorona? Just know that if you're ever happen to be in the Española, New Mexico, I think that's what it was called, that Llorona's out there.
There's a place in America that is so haunted, most people will not stay the night there. This would be the Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. Now, a lot of bad things have happened at this place, and it is steeped in history and lore. But one of the creepiest legends about this place is there was a young girl, and her sister and her mother, they were all poisoned in this house. Now, this young girl, she had a doll, a porcelain doll, much like this one. And she slept with this doll in her bed every night. Now, when the new owners purchased this place and they were going to turn it into a bed and breakfast, they found the doll and they put it in the exact bed in the exact room where this girl passed away, out of respect for her. Now, once they get this place fixed up, the first night they rent that room out to someone. This woman comes. She goes into the room. She sees the doll on the bed. And she said, I don't want this creepy thing in my room. She picks it up. She takes it out of the room. And she sets it down. Later that night, she's in bed. She wakes up to this doll right next to her in bed with its hands around her neck. She jumps up, she runs out of the room, and she immediately calls the owners and is like, what kind of trick are you trying to pull on me? Like, this is not funny. The owners are like, we are nowhere near the property. You were the only guest tonight. Like, no one else is there. So no one could have been messing with you. And she never knew what happened and how that doll got in bed with her. But since that moment, they have a rule that if you stay in that bedroom, do not take the doll out of the bed, because if you do, it will get in bed with you at night. And this has been an ongoing legend for years and years. And they actually call that the doll room. Now, one other creepy story that I heard at the Myrtles Plantation. There was this girl who went on one of the tours that they give. And they happened to go into this room where there was a table. And it had this very large tablecloth. As they walk past this table, this girl sits up against the table. And she screams. And everybody looks at her, what's wrong? What's wrong? She says, something grabbed her leg from under the table. They look underneath there. There was no one there. And she leaves the premises and is like, I will not go back in that place. And that is just one of the many creepy occurrences that happens at the Myrtles Plantation.
This right here is one of the saddest and most mysterious stories you'll ever hear. It all started with these two girls right here. You see the guy, we low-key don't care about him, we'll come back to him later. You see the girls, this is Joanna, and this is Jacqueline. Joanna and Jacqueline were two sisters living together, and one day in 1975, on a random day, they were going to church. So on that day, Joanna and Jacqueline got ready, went down the street, and on their way to church, they got unalived by a speeding car. I know that was shocking, but sorry, that's what happened. A speeding car didn't see them and hit them all three. The car hit them, the boy got transported to the hospital very quick, but Joanna and Jacqueline sadly got unalived instantly. So, as you can imagine, this was a tragedy. 3 young innocent kids hit by a who can't drive. Everybody felt sorry for them back then, and the girls' parents were devastated. Father of the girls even said that he was sure that Joanna and Jacqueline will come back one day, but as you can imagine, that doesn't work. He was just hopeless, wishing for something like this to happen, knowing that it's impossible. And ladies and gentlemen, this was the sad story. I'm sorry if it did something to you. See you on the next one. Why did you stay? Oh, you stayed because you want to know the whole story? Well, here it is. You see, just 1 year after the accident, one single year, the parents of Joanna and Jacqueline made a comeback because they didn't make one, but 2 children. Yes, after that Joanna and Jacqueline sadly got unalived, the parents didn't wait a single year and they made this. Look, okay, pause, stop. I'm not wishing this for nobody, okay? But if you let's imagine that your child, got unalived 1 year ago. Aren't you supposed to be sad, for a little bit of a long time? How did you manage to, in order to get children if you was sad? I don't know. Anyways, the parents have new kids now, Jennifer and Gillian, or Jillian, I don't know how to say it, and they are twins. So normally the parents were very happy, but everything changed when they became 3 years old. Because when they grew up a little bit, they started recognizing places they've never seen before. For example, one of them goes to their parents, they go okay, look, Dad, can we go to that park? Their parents would go what park you're talking about? That park we went to. Go to the left, down the hill, go to the right, wait a little bit, go to the left, then left. You know what I'm talking about. How do you know that? We've never been there. Jacqueline and Joanna went to that park multiple times. Another thing that the twins did was recognizing their toys. For example, if you put 2 kids in the same room, they will immediately fight for toys. In this case, they didn't. Matter of fact, the toys I'm talking about were for Jacqueline and Joanna. But you see, when the twins saw these toys, they were like, oh yeah, we recognize those. Those are ours. They played with them exactly like the past sisters did. Jacqueline had a scar on her forehead before she passed. Jennifer has a birthmark in the exact same place. The sisters got unalived by a car. The twins are scared of cars. Matter of fact, every time a car is near them, Jennifer would say, a car is coming to get us. One last crazy thing, when they used to play together, one of them will lay on the ground and the other one will repeat, the blood is coming out of your eyes. Why the hell would the kids say that? Well, I'll tell you why, because they're not kids. No, they're not kids. They lived before and their names were Joanna and Jacqueline. Yes, if you didn't get this yet, people say that Joanna and Jacqueline got reincarnated in the body of the twins. 1 year later, they came back as the same person, same memories, just different bodies.
Don't mind the noise in the background, but I got another scary story time for y'all, okay? This story time took place at the New York State Capitol. This was at the peak of me and my family saying that we was gonna go to haunted places together and getting into, all that spooky stuff. They was giving out like open tours for people that wanted to see like the haunted building, and they was doing it through like a website. So my mom signed us all up to go, and so we went, right? I'm so mad that I don't have the proof for y'all, but y'all gonna believe me. Some of y'all, and some of y'all not gonna believe me. So as they're giving us like little tours throughout the whole building, they're bringing us into like different rooms and explaining what people see in different rooms. So the main part where people like would see like a spirit was on the staircase, like the major staircase, and they would say that they seen like a woman standing at the top of the stairs. They thought they seen a woman fall from the top of the stairs. But the reason they said people seen that was because at that building, somebody actually did fall from the top of the stairs balcony onto the ground. They also said, like, people would see, like, people standing on the roof. Because, like, when you looked up, it was, like, a clear glass. And, yeah, people would say they seen people standing on the roof. While he's telling us this part, right? I take a picture of what he was talking about, the ceiling that has the glass on it. And later on, like while I was taking the picture, I didn't notice anything. But later on, after we left, when I was looking at the picture, I'm so mad I don't have it. It's in my old phone. There was 2 handprints on the freaking glass. I kid you not. And it was white, like if somebody put their hands in powder and put it on there. Now, it could have been a coincidence. Like, they probably did it on purpose because they knew that we was coming. But when I did my research and I looked up this place on like haunted places in the area I live in, I looked it up on YouTube. It says that it is haunted. You know, people did pass away there. So I kind of feel like that was real. Like, I don't think that they planned that. Also, when we went downstairs on the first floor, I think it was, the guy that was giving us a tour, he was showing us, like, how detailed they made everything down there. I don't really know what you would call it, but, like, there were these little, like, brown carvings they did on the walls, but at the top of the walls. And all of them was, like, lions, I think. But on one of them, it was the D word. And when I seen that, I was like, why would they do that? It's like they wanted this place to be haunted. They had some really scary stories, like, of people seeing so many different spirits. Majority of them was women, but I wish I had the pictures for y'all.
Story for you is my encounter with a ghost from way back when I was in my junior year at college. It was 2007 and I just transferred to a new school. The university was known for having some local historical buildings. The main building was a huge mansion that was previously owned by a former President Woodrow Wilson and was also used as Daddy Warbucks' mansion in the 1982 movie Annie.
Love Annie.
The library was previously the summer home of the Guggenheim family, and their former stable house was made into a theatre and music building. As a theatre major, I spent the majority of my time in the former stable house, as previously mentioned. Upon transferring, I was immediately told by friends that the building was haunted by a ghost known only as Stable Boy. Long story short, the tale of Stable Boy is basically that while working with the horses, he was kicked in the head and sadly died. Friends claimed many people, including some of them, had encountered him, either seeing him or hearing his cries, in various parts of the building. Those that saw him all gave the same description. A young boy, probably no more than 16, but quite tall for his age, wearing dark tan pants, a plaid shirt, and a very sad disposition. One day, while running late to class, I was speed walking through the parking lot of the theatre. The lot was parking pass only, but there were a couple of spots you were allowed to snag if you didn't have a pass. While alone in the lot, I noticed my roommate had gotten one of the free spots. Good for her, I thought. As I looked closer at her car, I noticed something beside it, but it wasn't just something, though. It was someone.
Oh dear.
He was crouched down
Oh no.
between her car and another.
I don't love that at all.
He had his head in his hands as if he was crying to himself. I stopped in my tracks to look closer. As if sensing me, he looked up and we locked eyes. He started moving from his crouched position, rising at an eerily slow pace, never breaking eye contact. Although we were at opposite ends of the lot, I knew immediately and without a doubt that it was him. Stable boy. The only thing I could think to do, in order to avoid this apparition that was now keenly aware of my presence, was to walk as slowly as possible. I told myself not to blink and to keep my eyes locked on this young boy. I held his stare as long as I could, the boy not moving an inch, as I walked one careful step after another. Finally, my eyes began to dry up and I had no choice but to blink. The blink was fast, but in that instant, he was gone. There was no time for him to hide anywhere without me seeing. He just vanished. At that moment, I knew it was my chance. As I raced to the front door of the theatre, I burst into class, which luckily hadn't begun yet, went straight to my roommate. "Kelly, stable boy was just standing next to your car." The whole class heard me shout. Everyone gasped, and Kelly's face looked terrified. The students raced to the large window to see, but I knew he wouldn't be there. After class, my friends and I escorted my roommate to her car, inspecting every inch to make sure Stable Boy wasn't trying to hitch a ride. I never physically saw him after that, but I knew he could still see me. In our theatre dressing room, we each had our own mirror and sink space. There were times when I would shut off my sink, and as if an invisible hand twisted the knob back round, the water would switch on at full blast. There were also changing closets, and while inside, I'd hear slow steps coming from the other side of my closet door. When I would peek out, I was completely alone. I began to think he was having fun messing with me when he started switching the lights off as soon as I was in the closet, forcing me to change in the dark, and then switching them back on as soon as I walked out. At that point, I figured if he was pranking me and giving me some kind of joy, then I was fine with it. The last time I ever heard from him was while focusing stage lights for a play with my friend Mike. In order to properly focus them without any light pollution, we had to work alone in the theatre around midnight when it was completely pitch black. While working the light board and listening to music, Mike paused and said, "Shh, do you hear that?" I switched off the music, and as if it was coming from the catwalk above us, we heard the faint sounds of someone crying. We could clearly see that no one was there, and we knew we were the only ones allowed in the theatre at that hour. But the sounds of sadness were definitely close and definitely human. We said to the empty space, "Sorry for all the lights, we'll be done soon." The crying began to subside as we raced to finish our work. Other friends had more encounters with him after that, but that was the end of my time with the sad, young, stable boy. Thank you for taking the time to read it. Lots of love and spookiness. Lizzie Spellman. Yes, like the witch.
Thanksgiving is a time when people get together. It's also a time when creepy things happen. Now, this story takes place in eastern Tennessee. There was this man named Alan. Alan said when he was young, he remembered being at his grandfather's. And he said one day this man came over to his grandfather's house. He was dressed in all black with these snake cowboy boots and this jewelry and this huge necklace that had an amulet on it. And said his grandfather told him, "Go to your room right now." So he went into his room, but he eavesdropped on his grandfather and this man's conversation. And this man began saying to his grandfather, "If you ever cross me, if you ever do anything wrong, I have the ability to turn into something else. I can become an animal, and I will come after you." Now, he thought this conversation was very strange, but after many years, he forgot about it. Fast forward several years down the road, he goes back to his grandfather's house for Thanksgiving. Now, all the adults, they are cooking food, they're talking, and so him and his cousin Jimmy, they decide they're going to go out in the woods and play. So they go into the woods behind his grandfather's house. As they're going out the door, his grandfather grabs him and says, "Hey, you boys be careful out there. If you see something, if you hear something, you run back to the house." And they said, "Okay, Grandpa." They didn't know why he was telling him that. It's as if he was scared of something. So they make their way into the woods, And they go pretty deep. It's about an hour now since they've left the house. And they find themselves very far in this forest. That's when they come across this very old cabin. It is run down, it is overgrown, and it looks like it's been there for a very long time. So they go inside, they open the door, and when they enter into this place, the first thing that they notice is there's food on the table. There's clothes hanging up. There are personal items. And there is a stack of these fur pelts of various different animals. So Alan says to Jimmy, you know, I think that someone lives here. Like, someone is staying at this place. You know, I don't think we should be here. Like, we need to leave. And Jimmy's like, yeah, you're right. Let's get out of here. So they go out the door. They get on the porch and they run off towards the woods. But they are stopped in their tracks because standing outside of this cabin, about 15 feet away, is this very large deer. And it is staring directly at them. Well, they're both confused because normally deers in this area would be spooked and they'd run off. But this deer stood its ground. And they both got a very bad feeling about this animal. So they took off running as fast as they could, all the way back to their grandfather's house. Well, they go inside, they eat dinner, and after a couple hours, they kind of forget about what happened. Later that night, they are asleep in one of the bedrooms. And Jimmy is sitting there talking to Alan. And he's like, hey, you know, that was kind of weird, that deer we seen earlier. And he's like, yeah, you know, I don't know where, like, it came from. It just came out of nowhere. Right as they're talking about this, they see a shadow move past the window. Jimmy's like, you know, what was that? And Alan's like, I don't know. So they both walk slowly over to the window. And when they look out, they see a coyote in the yard. And it's staring at them with these bright yellow eyes. And then it just disappears. And they have no idea where it went. But then they hear a thump, thump, thump up on the roof. Something is up there and it's walking around. And then they hear this loud howl. And it scares both of them. They start screaming, Grandpa, Grandpa. The grandfather comes running in the bedroom. What's wrong? What's wrong? They tell their grandfather what they seen and what happened to them that day. The grandfather looks at them and says, you know, it's just the wind. Go back to sleep. So they both lay back in their beds. The grandfather goes out the room. About 5 minutes later, they hear boom, 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 someone knocking on the door. And they hear the grandfather's footsteps go, and they hear someone come in. Then they hear this man's voice say, you know, what were your boys doing on my property? Were they snooping on me? Like, why did you have them over there? And his grandfather's like, no, you know, they're young. Like, they were just playing around. They didn't mean to come, like, on your place. I'm very sorry. And he goes, you better be, because next time they won't be so lucky. Now, they happen to come out of the room just a little bit to where they could see down the hallway. And that's when Alan sees this man. He is wearing all black, snake boots, and jewelry. It occurs to him that this is the man that talked to his grandfather many, many years before that and said he could turn into an animal.
This is one of the most chilling true crime cases that I've ever come across, and there's basically no information on it. On October 18th of 1949, a man named Jules Fornstein went out for the evening. He was a magistrate judge. He lived with his wife and 2 children in Philadelphia. He would later call his wife Dorothy, tell her that, hey, I'm going to be really late tonight, basically saying, don't wait up. But when he arrived later that night, he found his 2 children terrified in their bedroom. Both of the kids were crying, Mommy's gone. Jules didn't know what exactly had happened. He talked to his children and they said that about 15 minutes before he got home, the little girl, she had been awoken by a noise. When she went to go check, she saw a man carrying her mother on his shoulder walking out the door. Now, this little girl did tell her father that it looked like her mom was either unconscious or not alive anymore. This little girl was brave enough to ask, like, what's going on? And the man had patted her on the head and said, "Go back to sleep, little one. Your mom is fine." He walked outside and then locked the door. When the police began to investigate, they initially doubted the children's story, but then they brought in a psychologist. A psychologist did confirm that this story was true. So they looked further into the family, considering that Mr. Fornstein was a judge. They thought that maybe someone was holding a grudge against him. And this was further backed up by the fact that 5 years earlier, there had been a break into their house and nothing was stolen, but Dorothy had been attacked pretty violently. Now, in this attack 5 years prior, there was nothing taken from the home. Like I said, there was no sign of forced entry. They also didn't find any fingerprints at the scene. Police then started looking for Dorothy, but basically found nothing. They called mental health hospitals, they called morgues, and they told everybody to keep an eye out for an unidentified woman, but apparently nothing has come of that, and Dorothy has been missing ever since. I know that this is a super old case, but I just really can't imagine her just being gone and there not being a lot of information out there. But what are your thoughts on this case? Let me know down in the comments. Follow for more true crime.
Grab your snacks, y'all drinks, y'all blankets, because I got another scary story time for y'all. So, right, we at the camping thing that we go to every year. We go every year in the summertime since 2020. So, it was one night, right? One night. So, let me just give y'all a little scenery of how our campsite looked. So, it's a big campsite, but it's 3 big tents. And they fit like 8 people per tent, but like it wasn't 8 people per tent. The first tent had like 4 people, the other tent had 2 people, and then the third tent had 3 people. And on the campsite, it's like a little table in between the tents, and there's like a pit for you to make fire and like cook and stuff. Now, my parents put tikis all around the campsite so that at nighttime the fire makes like a little path so you could see who's on the campsite, who's walking past the campsite, who's around it. Like, you can see it's light at nighttime. Plus, we have these huge ass bear flashlights, so we were sturdy. Now, we have walkie-talkies, right? I take my walkie-talkie and I tell everybody that I'm going to the tent because I was mad at my boyfriend and I just wanted to go to the campsite. Nobody came with me to the campsite. Mind you, we in the woods, so you can hear everything. Nobody's walking behind me. Okay? Nobody's walking behind me. But I get in the I get in the tent. And I'm chilling in the tent. I start playing a game on my iPad. And everybody's just chilling, playing around with the walkie-talkies, especially the little ones. But then the walkie-talkies just get like quiet, like nobody's talking. I guess they was busy. They was occupied doing something. So nobody's talking on the walkie-talkie. So now it's making me feel like I'm really alone. So I start getting scared and weird shit start happening. So like I said, I was playing on my iPad, but once I noticed that nobody was talking on the walkie-talkie, I started listening to make sure, like, nobody's trying to scare me or nothing, because we at camp, like, that's what we usually do, but nobody did it yet while we was at camp this year. And I started hearing footsteps, like, literally walking around my tent and my tent only, but it sounded like the footsteps was coming from far away and getting closer, but it didn't sound like they was, like, just walking. It sounded like they was walking and then they would jump to get closer. And then like tiptoe and walk and jump to get closer. I'm not saying it was a bunny though, because it didn't sound like a bunny, if that makes sense. But yeah, I started hearing it get closer. Now the footsteps keep going around my tent. But like, I have the flashlight on in the tent with me, and you could see people's shadows from the fires outside of the tents, and you can also see my shadow. with the light on that's in the tent. So, like I said, I don't see no shadows. I'm just hearing shit. So, I start going to the window of the tent and I'm looking out to see if I see anything because the fire helps me see. But there's nobody around. There's no animals around. And I had probably got up to look at the window like 3 to 4 times. And I didn't see nobody. I didn't hear anything. It was always when I went to sit back down, thinking that I was good, I would hear something. So I start getting paranoid now. And I'm literally like calling everybody on the walkie-talkies, like, whoever's playing, stop playing with me. Like, that's not funny. And for some reason, nobody can hear me all of a sudden. But the thing with the walkie-talkies was, I guess other people at the campsite have walkie-talkies too. And I don't know if they was the same brand or not, but like you could hear police stations on the walkie-talkies. You could hear other people from the campsite on the walkie-talkies if they, I guess, went on your channel. So, literally nobody's answering me, but, like, I'm hearing staticky noises. Basically, the walkie-talkie started malfunctioning. Like, I'm hearing staticky noises, like, if, like, a TV was playing, but it didn't have a channel on. So, I'm like, fuck, like, nobody can hear me on the walkie-talkie if I needed help. So, I'm just scared. I'm sitting in the tent, and I keep hearing the footsteps. And then, eventually, I get up to the point where whoever or whatever was around might have got scared and was like, okay, somebody's here. Because when I got up, like, I didn't hear no footsteps, no running through the leaves. I didn't hear nothing move away from the tent. I felt like whatever was there was still standing there, but I didn't hear or see nothing move. So it was just weird. But after that, I say I was in there for like 10-15 minutes waiting to see if I heard something. I didn't hear nothing, but eventually everybody that lives on the campsite with us came back to the campsite. And I told them what happened. Everybody looked like they was like scared for me. Like nobody knew what I was talking about. Nobody was pranking me because everybody, I guess, was like doing dishes and using the bathrooms, taking showers. So everybody was basically occupied doing what they had to do. So that's how I knew, like, whatever was around the tent, like, was not nobody that is on this campsite with me right now. But that was scary to me personally. But I have an even crazier, scary story time from my parents of when they went camping when they was 19 and 20. So if y'all want that, let me know, because that is crazy.
1990, 31-year-old John O'Brien was a landscaper in a town just outside of Chicago, Illinois. In January of that year, he and his friend David decided they wanted to escape the cold Chicago winter and go on some vacation to somewhere nice and warm. And so they decided to book a trip to the very sunny Caribbean islands of Trinidad and Tobago. They left for their trip just a couple of days later, which was believed to be January 8th or January 9th, and the hotel they were staying in was right near the airport in Trinidad. So they land in Trinidad, they get off their plane, they make their way out of the airport, they go to their hotel, they drop their luggage, and then they headed out to explore the town. And over the next couple of days, they not only explored Trinidad, but also the island of Tobago, which was a 4-hour boat ride away. And they had great food, they saw some really cool attractions, and just overall, they had a chance to relax in the warm weather while all their friends back home were freezing in Chicago. And so, by all accounts, their vacation was going exactly to plan until Sunday, the 14th of January. This was the day before they were supposed to fly back to Chicago. That day, John began complaining of some unnamed health issue, which has not been made public, so we don't know what it is, and he went to some drugstore in town in Trinidad to look for a specific medication for this unnamed health issue. But the drugstore did not carry this medication, so John left and he went to another drugstore and another store, but nobody had this medication. And so by the time John got back to the hotel and saw David, David would later remark that John was not only distraught about not having this medication, But John was disoriented. Like whatever this health issue was, it was starting to manifest itself in this kind of disoriented state that John was in because it was not being treated. But eventually, David decided that John was okay enough that they did not need to call a hospital or call a doctor, and the two men decided to just go to bed because after all, they had a very early flight the next morning. So the two men climb into their respective beds, which are in the same room, two twin-sized beds, and they fall asleep. But about an hour to maybe an hour and a half after David had fallen asleep, he wakes up to some man standing next to his bed, choking him. He's grabbing his throat and throttling him. And so David has no time to respond to what's going on. He just starts grabbing this guy's hands and he manages to push them off of him. And then this guy who's standing next to his bed grabs the lamp next to him and smashes David with it. David, from getting hit, falls out of the bed. He lands on the ground, and this guy, his attacker, jumps on top of him, and the two men are fighting. But eventually David manages to overpower this guy and he kicks him off. And as soon as he does that, he realizes this guy that's been attacking him is John, and John is completely naked. He's got no clothes on. And so John just stands up and David's looking at him like, what's going on? And John just runs out of the hotel room. He ends up running down the hall. He goes down the stairs. He runs past the front desk, out the front doors of the hotel, and just takes off running. And so John runs for several minutes until he reaches the airport, but instead of going through the front gates, he goes to the side of the front gates where there are these huge chain link fences with barbed wire at the top. And John, again wearing no clothes, climbs up the chain link fence and then manages to navigate the barbs at the top and drops over onto the other side. But where he landed, although it was on airport property, it was kind of like a trap because this airport had two fences around its perimeter back to back. And so where John landed was like this grassy no man's land between these two fences. But John was on this kind of deranged mission, so he stands up and instead of trying to get back out again, he turns and climbs the next fence, the one that is closer to the airport. And so he climbs up this fence, he manages to get past all the barbed wire at the top, and he drops into the parking lot on the other side. He stands up and just continues running towards the main building of the airport. But between him and the main building of this airport is this huge concrete wall that doesn't look like it has any place to grab onto to climb over it. But John runs up to this wall and manages to climb up and over the wall. And where he landed on the other side was right next to this security guard shack. And so he comes crashing down, and the four security guards that are in this shack, they see him come over the wall. They see this naked guy just suddenly appear. And so they charge out to apprehend him and figure out what's going on. But John apparently attacked them. We don't know exactly what he did, but he managed to overpower all four of them, and he stole their four-wheel drive vehicle. And so John just bombs away from the security guard shack with the four security guards chasing him on foot. And John, he weaves around the outside of the main airport building and he heads out onto the tarmac. Out on the tarmac, there were several planes that were moving into position for takeoff. One of those planes was this huge British Airways jet airliner passenger plane that was actually the next to take off. They'd already fired up their engines and they were sitting at the top of the runway just waiting for clearance. And John just drives directly into this plane. But the vehicle he was driving, this little four-wheel drive vehicle, it was not tall enough to actually strike the main body of this plane. So instead, when he hit this plane, he basically got wedged underneath one of the wings. At this point, the four security guards that had been attacked and had their vehicle stolen from them, I mean, they're running towards the tarmac, but they've also alerted other security personnel in the airport who are all streaming out onto the tarmac towards this British Airways plane and this vehicle and John. And so as they are descending on the scene, the security guards would see John from the passenger seat of this four-wheel drive vehicle. He stands up and they can see he's got a pretty nasty cut on his shoulder. And John reaches up and starts rubbing his hand on the underside of the plane, which had been damaged from running into it. And there was oil leaking off the underside of this plane. And John began rubbing this oil around and then dabbing it into his big wound on his shoulder. And then after packing it with this oil, John leapt out of the wrecked wrecked four-wheel drive vehicle and then just took off running away from all these security guards and away from this plane. And in the chaos of this moment, all these security guards and all the airport personnel that were descending on this scene, they managed to lose sight of John. He disappeared on the backside of this plane. And so all these security guards and airport personnel, they come to a stop about 100 feet away from this plane and this wrecked vehicle, and they're just kind of staring at it, wondering, what are we going to do next? They're calling other agencies to come in and assist with this situation, when all of a sudden, somebody notices John about 300 feet away on the other side of the plane. He comes out from behind a building. And so he's running towards the plane, he's running towards this wall of security guards and other airport staff, and John, he manages to get all the way up to the plane before anybody can come up and apprehend him. And when he reaches the plane, he stops for a second, looks up at the engine of this airplane that's still spinning. It's been turned on, and John jumps into the engine, and instantaneously, John ceases to exist. He is completely decimated. No one knows for sure what actually caused John's rampage, although it's assumed it had to do with whatever this unnamed health issue was. Ultimately, his death was ruled a suicide.
He had the choice, do it himself or die in one of the worst deaths imaginable. Viewer discretion is advised. This takes us to Šolta Island, which is located in Croatia. There you will find the Bay of Poganica cave, and it is September of 2002. A 31-year-old Czech diver named Miroslav Kuklis decided he wanted to take a dive. I don't have any photos of him, unfortunately, but this is the actual opening to that cave system. It's literally just 2 meters wide. And when you get in there, it will eventually break down into 2 different areas. One of those areas being the deep gallery, usually an area that people do not dive to. The waters down there are extremely murky and foggy, and you can't even see your hand if it's a foot in front of you. But Miroslav decided to go down that path. Miroslav never came back up, and he had on a 15-liter air tank, which would give him maybe about an hour's worth of air supply. But that time came and went, and he never came back. They would send in rescue divers, and they were attached to ropes, to no avail. They didn't find him. At this point, they realized he's dead. At one point, when 2 rescue divers were down there, one of them also got lost in the murky, cloudy water, and he was swallowed into the abyss, never to resurface alive. Now you have a rescue diver dead, and a diver they're trying to find is likely also dead. Quite possibly trapped there forever. And then they found him, 54 meters down below in the deep gallery. His diving mask was not on. The regulator was out of his mouth. And then one of the strangest things rescue divers have ever seen. He had a knife protruding out of his chest. He had been stabbed. This turns into a possible homicide investigation now. But their investigation would lead them to one tragic answer. Miroslav bit off more than he can chew. He went into the depths of this murky water. He became disoriented. He became lost. He began to struggle. He began to have anxiety. His heart was likely racing. He couldn't find his way back up. And as each minute passes, he's losing more and more air. He is going to drown if he cannot find his way out. This would have been agonizing hell for him. Struggling to breathe, struggling to find his way out. And it got to a point where he had to make an impossible decision. Can I end my own life here painless, or do I drown and die in one of the worst ways possible? Slowly suffocating in the depths of this dark water. Ultimately, he decided to take out a knife and stab himself in his chest, thinking that that would kill him. It didn't work. His lungs were full of water. He stabbed himself to prevent a horrible death, but unfortunately it didn't work, and he died in one of the worst deaths imaginable.
You can't make this stuff up. You might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
A massive manhunt would be underway for 3 men who were shooting cops. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Dale Claxton. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Dale Claxton was a very happily married 45-year-old man, and he and his wife had 4 children and 1 grandchild. And he was a wonderful grandfather. He loved being one. He was described as just a really good guy, someone who liked to have fun. And he was also eager to protect and serve. Around 1995, Dale Claxton would join the Cortez Police Department. That's in Cortez, Colorado. When this case occurred, he had only been a police officer for 3 short years. On May 29th, 1998, there was reports of a stolen water truck. Dale just so happened to see the stolen water truck and he began to follow it. He had no way of knowing of the insanity that was about to break out. Suddenly, the water truck pulls off to the side of the road. Clearly, they notice there's a cop behind him. And that is when multiple individuals dressed in camouflage gear, armed with guns, jumped out of the water truck and approached Dale. Dale stood no chance. He didn't even have time to take off his seatbelt when these armed men, began to fire at his police vehicle. This is an actual photo of his car. Dale was shot numerous times and would be pronounced dead at the scene. He had radioed in the location of the water truck before all of this happened, and when other officers arrived, they found Dale and knew they had a problem. So at first, they were looking for this water truck, but then they found the water truck abandoned. The men who were in it were gone. Deputy Jason Bishop was in his patrol car when all of a sudden a yellow pickup truck began to speed by him. There was a man in the bed of the truck who had, armed with an assault weapon, began to fire at the deputy. He was shot as well, but would end up surviving. Then Trooper Steve Keller saw the yellow pickup truck. He could actually see them in his mirror, that they were right on his tail and that they were armed. They began firing at him as well. He too is shot, but would end up surviving. Detective Todd Martin was the next officer that this yellow pickup truck approached. He was set to return fire when they began firing at him. He was shot several times, but also survived. It was now all hands on deck. There were 3 men in a yellow pickup truck who were going around and shooting police officers with absolutely no care in the world. They clearly knew what they were doing, and this was intentional. And so the biggest manhunt in Colorado's history would begin. The National Guard was called in. 500 officers from various different states came in to assist on the manhunt. These officers and National Guard were armed to the teeth because these men had no care in the world. They were going to shoot at you if they saw you. They had snipers perched up on cliffs and hills to see if this truck comes by, fully prepared to fire at them. A couple of hours later, the yellow pickup truck is found about 40 miles away from Cortez. It was abandoned. Now, they don't even know what kind of car they're looking for. The men had escaped successfully. But after investigating this for about a week or so, they were able to identify the men in question. Alan Pylon, Jason McVean, and Robert Mason. This is based off of several eyewitness accounts and various other investigative leads they went and looked into. None of these 3 men had ever had any criminal history. They'd never been arrested. They'd never been to jail. However, they were known to be very anti-government. They were part of militia groups, and they were actually removed and kicked out of those militia groups because they were too extreme for them. These are also 3 men who knew very well how to live out in the wilderness. They could live out there undetected for God knows how long, and no one would find them. They were experts, basically. A short time after the first shooting spree in Utah, another police officer was shot. This was in Bluff, Utah, and it was determined that he was shot by the same individuals who had done the spree earlier. They found another abandoned vehicle in Utah that they believed that the 3 men were using. This guy, by the way, ends up surviving as well. But about a day or so after his shooting, they finally catch a break. 26-year-old Robert Mason, one of the 3 suspects, was found. His body was found, but with a bullet hole in his head. He was gone, dead. He pulled a gun on himself and ended his life. So now they need to find the other 2 men. They put out a reward for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the 2 other men, despite an extensive search, would never be found. Alive, I should say. Found alive. On Halloween of 1999, an individual in San Juan County, Utah, called the police to say, "I know where the remains of one of the men is." The body of Alan Pylon. Police would confirm that the body was his through dental records. He too was found with a bullet hole in his head. He too took the coward's way out and ended his life. Then, on June 5th, 2007, this is now 7 or 8 years later after the last person was found, a rancher found this bunch of what looks like a makeshift campsite that hadn't been touched in a while, a bunch of belongings, and next to that were skeletal remains. The remains of the final suspect, Jason McVean. He apparently was wearing a watch which stopped on May 30th of the year that the shooting first took place. And they believe that's the day he likely ended his own life. 3 men who first were just guilty of stealing a water truck would then go on to kill an officer and attempt to kill other officers, multiple officers, had gravely injured many of them. And why did they do it? Nobody knows. To this day, they have absolutely no idea what sparked this entire thing. And they'll never know, because all 3 men are dead. They are now resting uncomfortably in the pits of hell, and their reasons and their motives will remain a mystery forever. Someone entered her home and killed her, but the question remains, who? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Joyce Cheney. Viewer discretion is advised. This case is going to take us to Port Lavaca, which is located right here in the state of Texas. At the time of this case, Joyce Harvey Cheney was a 52-year-old elementary school teacher. She was teaching at Jefferson Elementary School, and she had actually been teaching in that school district for 23 years. And then she had 5 years previous in a different school district, so she was a teacher for 28 years. I believe her husband had passed away at some point before all this, and I know she had at least one son who lived with her, and then she also had a daughter who did not live with them. Joyce had a passion for art and a love for teaching. She was a great teacher. Everyone loved her. Every student loved her. On April 19th, 1988, Joyce would go to school, she would teach her students, and then she would leave. It's believed that Joyce got home sometime around 4:15 p.m. Her son came home at approximately 5:40 p.m., and when he entered the home, he saw a nightmare. His mother was dead on the ground. When police first arrived, when they saw her body, they saw a giant blood stain on the back of her head, and it looked like someone had hit her over the head with something. And so initially police said this was a blunt force trauma murder, but also nothing in the house was stolen. All of the valuables were still there out in the open. Joyce was not raped. There was zero evidence of any sexual assault. There was also no forced entry, no doors kicked in, no windows opened. It could be that, Joyce is a sweet, trusting lady. She may have opened the door for this person, and then that person barged their way in. They don't know. There's actually very, very little published on this case. When the autopsy was conducted, they would say that this was not blunt force trauma. Joyce had been shot in the back of her head at a very close range, basically execution style. And she was shot with a small caliber weapon. They found no foreign fingerprints in the house. No additional DNA that didn't belong to Joyce. No shoe impressions, foot impressions, no tire tracks outside. No hairs that didn't match Joyce or her son. There was no evidence in this crime scene other than Joyce herself. As far as I can tell, again, I'm not 100% sure, but it does not look like there were any witnesses who saw or heard anything. And most of all, no one on earth knows who would ever want to do this to someone like Joyce. A very quiet, unassuming woman who was a sweet teacher, who never wronged anyone, who didn't have any enemies. When her elementary school students found out, it was devastating to them. They were absolutely heartbroken. And these are kids who never had to deal with death like this, especially not a violent death. And I'm sure people will want to ask, well, what about the son? He came home. I don't know. I'm certainly not going to sit here and lay any blame on a person because I don't see any mention of him ever being considered a person of interest or a suspect. I have to imagine that he probably had an alibi, and they can also determine what time she died, because even to this day, there is no named suspects or persons of interest. Joyce Harvey Cheney's case has remained unsolved. But someone somewhere out there might know the truth about what exactly happened to her and who did this. Perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the murder of Joyce Cheney in Port Lavaca, Texas, please call 361-552-2274.
Weird Spooky Storytime. What do you think about this alien encounter in San Jose? Well, I have 2 CE4 experiences. CE4 stands for Close Encounter of the Fourth Kind. Once when I was 17 and another at 22. My first experience, it was a Monday. I was getting ready to watch Monday Night Raw. My parents were in their bedroom, same with my brother. I was laying on the couch watching Pac Blue. It was some weak cop on bike show before MNR. Had my arm dangling off the armrest. I felt something tug at my fingers and I get up to look. It was standing in the kitchen, 4 foot nothing, flat, gray color, no mouth, no ears, slits for nose, and big black teardrop eyes. I saw it, looked back at the TV, looked again, it wasn't there. Then look back at the TV, and the credits for Monday Night Raw were rolling. It's an hour-long show. I was so confused. Over the year, I start seeing them in the sky often. I had these aggressive headaches that would happen often, but they stopped oddly on 9/11. I've been known to never been wrong, even when I want to. I just know things. It's weird. That led to my obsession of the extraterrestrial. I've heard stories like this where it's like in a blink, suddenly time has passed. Can you imagine coming face to face with something that is like out of a sci-fi movie, not believing what you're seeing, looking the other way, looking back, and then realizing an hour has passed in that moment? Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if any of you have had an experience like this, send it my way.